Hey everyone, thanks for joining me for this impromptu live stream here. Today I'm going to be talking to you guys about the recent stream on the MythVision podcast with Dr. Jef Tripp on the subject of undesigned coincidences. Being that I'm one of the chief McGroupies, you guys know that I'm going to be talking about this particular stream, even though I'm trying to avoid kind of doing the back and forth stuff with other YouTubers. But Dr. Tripp is a very sharp scholar, and so I think responding to some of his claims is worthwhile. Now, this particular stream should be pretty brief, and I'm only really trying to talk mostly about a couple of points that Dr. Tripp made in the stream. This isn't a comprehensive stream. For that, we will probably be doing one soon. Probably not on my channel, but on my friend Than's channel, Exploring Reality. So stay tuned for that. But I just wanted to address some of the points that I thought were some of his stronger points. And so the death of undesigned coincidences, was this the mother of all dunks on the argument from undesigned coincidences? Well, I don't think so. Proverbs 18:17 says that the first to state his case seems right until another comes and cross-examines him. And so basically what I want to talk to you guys about is a couple of examples that Dr. Tripp used as undesigned coincidences in works of fiction or in works of stories that Christians just wouldn't believe, miracle reports that we wouldn't believe, and show why this wasn't necessarily like the best comparisons here. And so real quick recap, undesigned coincidences, for those of you who don't know and are just completely out of the loop, an undesigned coincidence is a notable connection between two or more accounts or texts that doesn't seem to have been planned by the person or people giving the accounts. Despite their apparent independence, the items fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. Okay. And so I think most of you guys know the definition, but hey, there you go, just in case you didn't. A classic example of an undesigned coincidence in the Gospels is the story between Herod and his servants. And so it says in Matthew 14:1-2, at that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard about the fame of Jesus and said to his servants, this is John the Baptist. He's been raised from the dead. That's why these miraculous powers are at work in him. Okay. And so Mark's version, it doesn't have Herod saying anything to his servants about this particular question that he had about Jesus. And so it looks like, did Matthew maybe redact Mark? Is he just adding something? Is he just trying to add a little bit of flair here in having this question being directed to his servants? Like, what's going on? And then also, of course, the natural question is, how in the world would Matthew know what Herod had said to his servants? Is he an omniscient author? Did the Holy Spirit tell him? It's just one of these questions that's just left dangling out there. Well, the question explained is when we turn over to Luke 8:1-3. And Luke is just spitting out some casual list of followers, just spitting out casually, I should say, a list of followers of female followers of Jesus who are helping fund his ministry. And among them, he lists Joanna, the wife of Huzzah, Herod's household manager. And so, okay, well, that makes sense. How somebody, a disciple, could find out what was being said in Herod's courts when Jesus had a female disciple who was married to somebody working in Herod's own household. And so, like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, these things fit together really naturally, really well. And it's pretty clear that Luke's mention of Joanna in Luke 8:1-3 wasn't aimed at explaining Matthew's account. There's nothing about John the Baptist that's going on in this particular account, in this particular story. And so, it doesn't look like he's inventing this detail to explain something that he saw in Matthew's gospel. Luke also included Joanna in his narrative because he likely knew about her and the other women who followed Jesus. So he's also the sole gospel writer to mention Joanna, and he mentions her again in chapter 24. He also mentions unique details about Herod's particular interest in Jesus that he likely could have got from Joanna. And so I think this is just a good, again, classic example of an undesigned coincidence. And this has the ring of truth. It looks like testimony, right? And while it's possible that he received this information, some of this information from Joanna, Matthew never explicitly mentions Joanna, okay? And so, again, these are subtle. These are casual little comments that interlock. I think you guys probably know this by now. And so what this means, well, in fictions and forgeries, casual and subtle connections between elements are rare. Fictions typically lack interconnectedness, or when present, exhibit glaringly intentional connections. Usually. Now, Dr. Tripp is going to say, no, that's not the case. We can actually find undesigned coincidences in the story of Hercules, which we're going to talk about here in a moment. And again, this is just one small part that we're talking about in the stream. This is not a comprehensive rebuttal whatsoever. We're going to have a more detailed response with some colleagues of mine, maybe later this week. And so stay tuned for that. I'll be dropping information in the community post. It won't probably be on my channel, but Exploring Reality, for those of you guys who haven't subscribed, Than's channel is awesome, so definitely do so. All right, what else does this mean with undesigned coincidences? Somebody's saying my audio is kind of bad. Let me make sure that it's not my crappy... Oh no. All right, hold on one second here. I almost want to start the stream over. That's terrible. One sec here. All right, how about now? Can you guys hear me better now? All right, dang. Oh, I hate that. I almost want to start over from the beginning. That's terrible. I used the wrong mic. Oh well, that's all right. We'll just move on. This is worse, he says. Well, shoot. I don't know. Keep leaving me feedback, guys. Oh, okay. Now he's saying never mind. It's good. All right. Hey, this is the pitfalls of live streams, I guess. So apologize for the crappy audio quality. Testify more like Boomerfy. LOMO. Got him. Yes, you did. You did get me there. I probably should test the audio before I start there. Oh, well, whatever. I thought I did, but I guess I didn't. Anyways, this is one instance of interlocking, which is intriguing by itself. But I don't want people to be confused. One undesigned coincidence does not necessarily mean that these texts are reliable, okay? All right, and so that was just an example to bring people up to speed. The strength of the argument is that there are numerous undesigned coincidences found in the Gospels and dozens of others in the connections between Paul's letters and the book of Acts. And so that's where the actual strength of the argument lies. Now, Dr. Tripp is going to say, no, we can find undesigned coincidences actually in Euripides' story of Hercules, okay? And so let's take a look at what Dr. Tripp has to say. So let me bring him up here, and we're going to hear from the good doctor himself here of an example of an undesigned coincidence in a fictional work, which he says, McGrew says we wouldn't really expect that in a fictional work, okay? So here we go.
Okay, so Heracles. This is from Euripides' play, Heracles. And it has his wife turning to one of their sons. Now, his wife at this point thinks he's dead. He's been missing for years, and his last labor was to go down to Hades. So she thinks he just got trapped down there and he's dead. She doesn't know he's on the way back. So that's the sort of dramatic tension of the play. And at this point, she's talking to her sons, and she turns to one and she says, to you, your father now gone would have assigned Argus. You would have had the seat of proud Eurystheus, the rich and productive fields of Palestia, throwing over your head the robe of the beast, the lion's skin in which he himself was armed. Now, there's multiple sons around. Why does this kid get the lion's skin? Because what she's referring to is the Nemean lion.
Right. One of the labors that Heracles had to defeat, this lion that was impenetrable, undefeatable. I mean, it just, of course, he snapped its neck and it took its mane.
So every sculpture you see of Heracles is either him killing the lion or him carrying the skin of the lion as like his armor.
Right.
Because it's impenetrable. But like, why would you bring up Argus and Palestia as the places if it's associated with Nemea? Like, that doesn't seem, if it were fictional, you would think that you would bring up the place that people would know, which is Nemea, not these other places. Well, Nemea is down in the Peloponnesus. So is Argus. Argus is a little ways off, but it's in the eastern Peloponnesus. Now, Palestia is not even like a place. It's not an official land. Nobody's king of Palestia. And there's even some inconsistency on where people refer to it. with this name. But if we look at places in the appropriate time period that were referred to as Pelasgia, oh wait, they're on the eastern side of the Peloponnesus, which includes Nemea. So of course, if you had a son who was going to rule over a region that includes Nemea, you would want him to have the lion skin because that's something that those people would respect. So we have regions colloquially referred to as Pelasgia around Nemea, and she's just speaking naturally. In that time period, they're going to know where Pelasgia is. They're going to know where Argus is. So she doesn't need to spell out the fact that she's referring to this other story. She can just casually talk about this. So we have this undesigned geographical coincidence. And there are others. I'm not a devotional reader of Heracles' works.
Right.
I mean, I've read some, but
I'll look past your sins today.
Oh, okay. Yeah. He'll come after me himself. But I don't go to bed reading Euripides. I don't go to bed reading, Hercules Furens. And yet I just glanced through them and I found these sorts of undesigned coincidences between them. So what you would see is like, Hercules has just come from a certain labor and now he's in a certain town. And you're like, well, okay, how does that fit together? Well, he also has to go back to get his next labor, and that town is on the way to that labor. Now, that particular work doesn't mention any of that contextual information. So all it does is assume that you know it. But if I were reading this through a McGrewian lens, I would say, well, yeah, he doesn't need to mention it because this is just him relating what he reliably heard.
Right.
Reported. Okay. So I think we could stop there. That's basically the example that he gives. And so I think some of you in the comments I can already see are seeing some of the problems here. Sure, Euripides includes accurate geography and a casual reference in his narrative. The Nemea connection as a standalone detail it's interesting, but it involves only Euripides with no other connections from other works. And the only outside source is just known geography. Okay. Jef suggests that there may be more incidences resembling undesigned coincidences, and he says there are, but he just kind of hints at them. He doesn't really go into any of the details. He only provides this one example from, basically a quick review. And I feel like it's a bit of a stretch. The quickness of Jeff's conclusions, to me, at least, is a big red flag because as proponents of undesigned coincidences have said, like, we're not saying that, hey, casual connections can never, ever, ever appear in works of fictions, especially within a single work. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that the strength of the argument itself is that it's a cumulative argument, right? With multiple sources, okay? And so while I think that there are many, this is Lydia's quote, okay? Like, he literally quotes her opening chapter in the presentation. But then this particular part, for some reason, it just seems like, I don't know, like, I don't know how he exactly missed that. Because she says right here in Hidden in Plain View, page 24, that the argument is cumulative. Well, I think that many of the individual coincidences that I bring up here are strong indicators of reliability by themselves. It is not necessarily that any one coincidence carry the weight of the argument for reliability on its own. When in instance after instance, these documents fit together, just as truthful testimony fits together, there is a strong cumulative case for the documents, okay? Now, this is a slide that I used in my last live when I talked about undesigned coincidences. This is a quote from her husband, Tim. He's the one who basically got Lydia interested in the whole argument from undesigned coincidences in the first place. And he says over and over and over in his presentations, one undesigned coincidence like this might be an accident, like having two unrelated pieces of a jigsaw puzzle fit together just by chance. But if we discover numerous undesigned coincidences crisscrossing documents, and in particular, if each gospel has something that explains things in the others, it becomes ridiculous to insist that they're all just accidental. Okay. And so it's bringing up one undesigned coincidence from the story of Heracles that is within a self-contained narrative of Euripides. It seems like, kind of what is going on? What are we doing here? I'm a little confused. Okay. I think, again, Dr. Tripp is a sharp guy, a smart guy, but I feel like he's making some really hasty conclusions about something that he found thumbing through Euripides. Okay. Now here, let me give Dr. Tripp, let's see if we can help him out just a little bit. Okay. Here's some examples of what J.J. Blunt uses for undesigned coincidences within a single self-contained source. Okay. Not multiple sources, a single contained source. Okay. Some are strongish and some are pretty weak. Okay. So here's an example that I think is kind of similar. This is from Joshua. So the children of Israel camped on the east side of the Jordan River in preparation to enter Canaan's land. They crossed into the promised land just before Passover. This is indicated in Joshua 4:19 and Joshua 5:10. Prior to crossing the Jordan, scouts encountered Rahab, and there's a detail about the scouts. They're hiding in a pile of flax, okay? And this is actually kind of significant. At least Blunt suggests that this is significant because he is, the timing of this and the flax being there and all that other stuff is just kind of strange. And so it seems like there's an interlocking here, right? The flax harvest connection to this event is corroborated by references in Exodus 9:31 in the Gezer calendar, which provides an agricultural calendar from the 10th century. Okay. And so the lack of specific time frame from the scouts hiding in the flax is inferred by the presence of the flax on the roof. While the crossing date is clear, this detail is missing from the spy story, creating an apparent undesigned coincidence from within a single source. This coincidence also interlocks, which is with what we know about the flax harvest time. So it's similar. It's in one source. We get kind of a detail that we know about harvest season. He's talking about we get details what we know from geography. And so it's similar-ish, and it's worth noting that, hey, let's admit that it's very possible that the writer of Joshua could have created this coincidence. And this single coincidence by its own, I wouldn't say as an advocate, as a fan of undesigned coincidences, really carries the weight of the argument all by itself, right? It's like, okay, this is an example. It's interesting, but it's just one. And by itself, it's not necessarily powerful. I don't even think Lydia McGrew would rubber stamp this particular example of an undesigned coincidence and say, yeah, this is a really good example of an undesigned coincidence. Okay. Just because she references J.J. Blunt's work, she's trying to draw upon the strongest examples, at least that she thinks, in the book. And of course, this is an Old Testament undesigned coincidence, so she doesn't use it because her book isn't about that. But there are weak ones in his book and there are better ones in his book. Okay. Again, single source information of what we know outside of that, of the Bible because of the harvest season and all that stuff, but not particularly strong. Okay. Let's give a better example of an undesigned coincidence found actually within a single source. Okay. A stronger one. Okay. Late in David's reign, David's son Absalom rebels against him. Okay, we know that from 2 Samuel 15. Very surprisingly, one of David's closest confidants, the priest Ahithophel, who David said his counsels were like the very counsels of God himself. He actually turns on David and joins in the conspiracy with Absalom. So he's all Team David, and then unexpectedly, he's on Team Absalom all of a sudden. What exactly is going on? What caused Ahithophel to abandon his old friend, who is the anointed king of Israel, and join in a conspiracy against him? It's just kind of strange just reading from those texts by themselves. But we read in 2 Samuel 23:34 that Ahithophel had a son named Eliam, who was actually a member of David's guard. Okay. Eliam had a daughter, Ahithophel's granddaughter, who married another member of David's guard. We read about that in 2 Samuel 11:3. Any guesses to their names? Anybody in the comments want to guess the names of the granddaughter there? Okay. Take a wild guess. We got some Game of Thrones stuff here. I don't watch Game of Thrones, just to clarify. But there's some crazy stuff that's going to happen here in this story. Ahithophel's granddaughter, we find out, was Bathsheba. Okay. I don't think I have to spell out what happened there. Whom David obviously had dishonored by adultery, and he had Uriah, his husband, murdered. Okay. When Absalom, momentarily victorious, asks Ahithophel, what should he do? The priest tells him to go ravage all of David's concubines, a bitter eye for David's own adultery. And so basically he says, hey, Absalom, take all of David's concubines and basically, not to be too graphic here, but just go have sex with them in front of everybody, on this same place. And so it's like, wow, like what is going on here? So you got some crazy stuff going on here, but all of these passages kind of interlock in this very interesting way. But you wouldn't really notice that just from straight up reading 1st and 2nd Samuel, unless you're really, really, really paying attention. Okay. And so I think that would be like a much better example of an undesigned coincidence within a self-contained source. Now, if Dr. Tripp can find a bunch of these, like he can find them in Heracles, okay, then I might be a little bit more inclined to listen to his argument. But again, we're still talking about a single source and a geographical detail. Let's give just one more example, okay? What about Michal's bitterness toward David? Why did Michal, David's wife, become so bitter towards him near the end? You guys remember the story. He brings back the ark. He's dancing before the Lord. She's bitter. What was that all about? And so we read in 1 Samuel 18:20 that Saul's daughter, Michal, loved David, okay? After their marriage, she actually helps David escape through the window, even though she's Saul's daughter, and puts a dummy in his bed to deceive Saul's messengers. We read about that in 1 Samuel 19:12. Saul, as the tyrant of the family, he ends up giving her to another man named Palti, okay? A long war ensues in which David gradually he regains the upper hand over Saul, and David takes several other wives, Abigail and Ahinoam, or I hope I'm saying that right. Anyway, you see the name on the screen there. And he fathers children by them. And so David takes other wives. He has other kids, okay, in this whole process of being separated from Michal. Saul dies, and his captain Abner sends word to David, offering to make common cause with him to end the war and unite Israel under David. We read about this in 2 Samuel 3:12 through 16. David agrees, but only on one condition. And he says, Abner, bring me back Michal. I want Michal back, okay? One of Saul's sons carries out the demand, taking her away from her second husband, Palti. And Palti follows them out of the town weeping. And they finally turn to the guy and they're like, dude, go home, okay? Like, stop, okay? So Michal and Palti, they loved each other, right? Palti loved Michal, all right? This is not a happy reunion between David and Michal whatsoever, okay? And so later we read the story about David. He brings back the Ark of the Covenant. He dances before the Lord. Michal sees him through the window, and she despises him in her heart. She abuses him verbally as basically showing off before his female servants. A thinly veiled attack, it seems probable, at Abigail and Ahinoam. I hope I'm saying that right again. Not women who were as nobly born as she, right? She's the king's daughter. These are women that David just took that aren't, of royal descent and blood. And she's like, you're just embarrassing yourself dancing in front of these female servants, right? So she's insulting towards these other wives, okay? So David rebukes her in the same terms that she used. By my female servants of whom you have spoken, by them I shall be held in honor. And then David has children by each of these other wives, but Michal remains childless to her death. Okay. So those are two pretty decent examples, at least within a self-contained narrative, that unless you're reading this really close, it doesn't seem like they're just dropping these particular facts meant to like really, really interlock in this way of these kind of like side characters and different things like that. And so to me, that looks like undesigned coincidences, okay? These are ones that Tim McGrew has used in some of his presentations. I think they're pretty decent, okay? Even though they're in a single contained narrative, okay? And so again, if Dr. Tripp can find like many of these, and there are many throughout the Old Testament, again, in single contained books, then I think his argument would have a little bit more of a point. But we're using one, and then we're hastily generalizing, seemingly at least. And I'm sorry, that's just not a very strong argument. That's just not very convincing, okay? I think I'm giving stronger examples here that show better evidence for historicity. And this is what we would expect to find. He's finding one, promising, hey, I found others. Where are the examples? Where's the beef? If he can show them, I'd be interested. I'd be genuinely interested, okay? But I think he's just making a hasty conclusion. And so I basically already said all these things. I'm not going to read the slides, but let's look at another example here. So let me go back to the video, and Dr. Tripp is going to give another example of an undesigned coincidence, this time with Vespasian. And this one is a little more interesting, okay? So here we go.
Vespasian became emperor. He happened to be in Alexandria in Egypt. And Suetonius, Tacitus, and Dio Cassius all relate the story of him finding out that he was emperor. And at the same time, they all relate a story of Vespasian healing a blind man with his spit. So very much like Jesus. And also healing a man with a withered hand or leg. It sort of depends on which version you're reading, but we're not here to concentrate on the inconsistencies. What is consistent is he heals him by stepping on him. So he puts his heel on the guy, and either on his hand or his leg, and it's healed. Each of them contains distinct elements to their story. So they each have distinct details. So in Suetonius, Vespasian offers a sacrifice to the god Serapis. So he goes into the temple, offers a sacrifice to Serapis. So not to any other gods, none of the other Egyptian gods, to that one specifically. And then Serapis is the god who tells the blind man and the man with the withered limb that they should go to Vespasian to be healed. So they have this visionary dream. Now in Tacitus, he doesn't include the sacrifice at the temple of Serapis. He just notes that Vespasian was waiting for summer weather to travel by boat. So it seems like it's sort of late spring, and he's waiting for the water to calm down before he travels back to Rome. But Serapis does show up in that he's the one that tells the disabled men to go to Vespasian. By the time we get to Dio Cassius, no sacrifice in the temple, no summer winds, but the Nile overflows, and it seems to have happened early. So it seems like Vespasian enters the city, and all of a sudden the land is flourishing with an overflowing Nile. And he doesn't mention Serapis at all. He only says that the men received a vision in dreams. So it doesn't say where it came from. All of these details, all of these distinct details, whether it's the sacrifice to Serapis in his temple, whether it's waiting for the summer winds, or whether it's the Nile overflowing a little early, point to late spring. They all point to late April, early May. So we have, but they're clearly not dependent on each other. So Tacitus shows no evidence that he is concerned with the sacrifice to Serapis. And Suetonius shows no interest in the summer weather. Like they don't reflect each other at all in those distinct details, and yet they all agree on the timing of this event, which means they're undesigned coincidences. It's clear that Dio Cassius is not copying from Suetonius or Tacitus, and yet it fits together with what they said. So what McGrew might say is that this shows that Vespasian was in Alexandria in late spring when he became emperor. And I'd agree. But it doesn't prove that Vespasian actually healed these men.
Amen. Okay. I've been saying this like okay, we might find, as you talk about, and I'm sure you probably have it in your presentation, I feel like I'm skipping ahead, like characters might be from regions or something may have taken place, whether you take an oral memory angle, whether you take a particular testimonial, like, hey, this is just kind of like in early communities, people were talking about it. Your point in this is that they're not genetically dependent on each other for the source. So somehow Vespasian's narrative or story has been consistent through some type of spreading about how Vespasian did this, but they're all consistent also on him healing. Is it not mistaken? Hold on, let me see. Only, yeah.
So that he heals, and he heals the blind man in the same way. He heals the lame man in the same way. He uses the same technique. So there are other consistent details, but there are these distinct details that don't mirror each other, but they agree on a detail about the overall situation that this healing took place in. So to me, these fit the criteria for an undesigned coincidence.
Right.
Again, it's not super well defined, but based on the examples I see in her book, this would seem to fit. I think if this happened in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we would have an undesigned coincidence.
Based on her model. See,
yeah,
that word I have a problem with.
Okay. So actually, I am going to agree with Dr. Tripp. That is a good example of an undesigned coincidence. Okay. That's great. Congratulations. You actually found an undesigned coincidence outside of like the Bible. That is really cool because guess what? In my last stream, I pointed out there have been scholars outside of New Testament studies who have found undesigned coincidences and used them to argue for historicity of the account. I think he actually found a decent undesigned coincidence, but there's a big problem in this, bro. You are tripping. McGrew's position is not to claim that, look, there's an undesigned coincidence in a miracle account, therefore the miracle likely happened. No. The questionable miracles of Vespasian at the Alexandrian Spring, as reported by Tacitus and Dio Cassius, do offer some intriguing content. I think they really do form a genuine undesigned coincidence. Undesigned coincidences, though, are just one facet of a broader argument constructed by the McGrews. And so let's actually read what Lydia says about undesigned coincidences and the presence of miracles. And so this, again, is from her book. I'm going to be reading, I'll give you the reference at the end, but it says, I do not want to be misconstrued as saying something quite so simple as, we can see from undesigned coincidences that the Gospels are historically reliable. Therefore, they are reliable when they recount miracles, as well when they give non-miraculous facts. Therefore, probably all the miracles happened. So she's very clear up front in the beginning of the book. He quotes her first chapter, but she says this in her first chapter. She goes on to say, on the other hand, I do not want to concede an artificial separation between the miraculous claims in the Gospels and the non-miraculous ones, as though the former were prima facie false or dubious. I grant that claims of miracles are legitimately held at a higher evidential standard than non-miraculous claims for many reasons. If nothing else, there are many ways honest people can be mistaken about some miracles, especially healing miracles. Mere credulity is not a posture I recommend. It is, however, noteworthy that the internal marks of accuracy in the Gospels cut across the miraculous-non-miraculous divide. From a purely evidential point of view, there is no general pattern according to which the miracle stories are vague, while the non-miraculous facts are related with circumstantial detail. Nor do we find the non-miraculous accounts in the Gospels fit together by way of undesigned coincidences, where the miraculous do not. Another important thing, she goes on to say, related to this argument to the miraculous is this. If the Gospels are indeed truthful memoirs from those who are close to the facts, including those who had opportunity to interview the disciples themselves, then they represent not late traditions or storytelling. Rather, they represent what the alleged eyewitnesses themselves claimed, okay, for which they suffered severe early persecution. The point is presumably this point is presumably why propositions about dating and authorship of the Gospels are treated by critical scholars as controversial. For if they are early and reliable memoirs, of the life and death of Jesus, if they show us what the disciples themselves claimed about his resurrection, they make it clear that these accounts came from people who are in position to know. And if the disciples were willing to face death for their testimony, this pulls the rug out from under the gentle sounding but skeptical theory that nobody told a lie exactly, but that the miraculous claims about Jesus grew up among credulous people telling each other stories. So the whole telephone game, right? One is instead forced to ask whether the disciples lied about these matters, and if so, why would they do such a thing? Even when the undesigned coincidences among the Gospels do not directly support a miracle, they support the argument for their earliness and origins. Get that point? If the disciples risked their lives to attest that Jesus was risen, not in some vague spiritual sense, but in the robust bodily sense described in the Gospels, what does this tell us about the truth of their claims? And so I don't think there's any need to beat this further. It's abundantly clear. McGrew does not assert something as silly as, look, undesigned coincidences on a miracle account, therefore the miracle likely happened. She goes out of her way to clarify, okay? And so the misunderstanding of this distinction seems to me to kind of stick out like a sore thumb. And so I think, again, what he showed does prove, okay, that Vespasian was in the spring or was in Alexandria during the spring. And I do think that Dio Cassius and Tacitus definitely, at least besides the other one, form a true undesigned coincidence. However, it's important to note that these undesigned coincidences are just a single aspect of a broader argument. It's a two-stage argument, okay? And so we're saying basically, like, if these memoirs actually go back to what the eyewitnesses claimed, okay, great. Then why would they make these claims to a hostile audience, these claims that would be difficult to be mistaken about? And so, again, I just found it a little bit strange. Like, yeah, I'm totally willing to grant everything that he said, but the claim, the Vespasian claim and the resurrection claim are not the same thing, right? The McGrews even talk about Vespasian in their book. And so here is another long quote. Bear with me again, you guys. But this is from the Blackwell Companion to Natural Theology in their chapter on the argument for miracles, where they specifically talk about Vespasian because skeptics love Vespasian. Hume brings him up in his essay of miracles. He tries to do the same thing and parody a miracle account. And this is what they have to say. Hume's presentation here is so careless that it struck his opponents as disingenuous. The candor and veracity of the historian are beside the point, since the manner in which Tacitus introduces the story indicates plainly that he actually disbelieved the story. Okay, a little bit different here. Hume's characterization of the persons on whose authority Tacitus relied in relating the miracle as of some established character for judgment and veracity, as we may presume, drew special scorn from Campbell, for Tacitus says nothing of the sort. They go on to say, this entire affair bears on its face the mark of obvious imposture. It was conducted in Alexandria, the first major city, to declare in favor of Vespasian's imperial aspirations, and it was done in honor of both the emperor, for whom a divine sign would be most convenient, and of the local deity, Serapis, right? At Vespasian's request, physicians examined the two men who claimed to have received visions in the night, telling them to appeal to Vespasian to be cured. The physicians reported that the blind man was not totally blind, the lame man not totally lame, and added that any glory for a successful cure would redound to Vespasian himself, while any blame for a failure would fall back on the two supplicants, for fraudulently represented the oracle of Serapis. The Egyptian populace, whom Tacitus describes in this context as a people addicted to superstition, were hardly apt to be critical, where then Adams, he's referring to a person who responded to Hume in his own time, William Adams, he says, is the wonder that two men should be instructed to act the part of lame and blind when they were sure in exceeding the fraud, or of succeeding in the fraud, and of being well rewarded, as we may suppose, for their pains. As for Tacitus's references to the two living witnesses, there's no mystery here. If the fraud was perpetrated publicly as described, there were doubtless many people who saw the two men leap up and claim that they had been healed. There is no need to suggest that the witnesses were liars. It suffices that they were somewhat credulous. There was no need for them to inquire too closely. Unlike the apostles, they had absolutely nothing to lose in maintaining their account of what they had seen. No evidence. Douglas, quoting John Douglas, another person who responded to Hume in his own time, concludes dryly, inverting Hume's claim can be supposed to be weaker. At every point, the case of Vespasian differs critically from the resurrection. Indeed, from a Bayesian point of view, the wonder would be if, under such circumstances, some story of a miraculous demonstration in favor of Vespasian was not forthcoming. Given our background knowledge, the Bayes factor for the testimony is close to 1, as to give us virtually no epistemic traction. The report was almost as strongly to be expected if the two men had been parties to the deceit as if they had genuinely been healed. It is absurd to suggest that the evidence for these miracles bears comparison with the evidence for the resurrection. And so, again, two things. McGrews have never said, hey, undesigned coincidences, therefore the miracle happened. It's many, many, many undesigned coincidences crisscrossing throughout the Gospels, going back at least to what the eyewitnesses claimed, okay? Then it's like, well, why would they make these particular claims to a hostile audience, okay? There is no hostile audience in this situation with Vespasian. And so congratulations. I think you found a really cool undesigned coincidence. Dr. Tripp found a good one. And I think it's neat that he found one from secular history or Roman history. But this doesn't change anything what we know about Vespasian and his supposed miracle powers whatsoever. It doesn't even make a dent, okay? It just goes back to what those original eyewitnesses claimed, but the context of their claims is absolutely 100% different, okay? And so this is not a good comparison here. And so, yeah, I mean, I appreciate the engagement, but we're not comparing apples to apples here. He unearthed a solid example of an authentic, undesigned coincidence from Roman history involving the time and location of the alleged miracle hoax. That's it, okay? And so I thought this was actually the stronger part of his argument in the particular stream. And it just wasn't good. It was like I had high expectations because I think Dr. Tripp is a sharp guy. But there was a lot of things, he accused McGrew of circular reasoning or not understanding Bayes when it seemed like he showed kind of a misunderstanding of it. There'll be more to come. Again, just stay tuned. We're going to be doing a stream on my buddy Than's channel, Exploring Reality. We'll do more of a blow-by-blow kind of thing here. We're not going to go through the entire stream because it's 3 hours long, but definitely stay tuned for that. I hope you guys found this helpful. Let me know what you think in the comments. Am I off base? Am I missing something here? Is there something that I'm not understanding? Do you think these are good examples that overthrow the McGrew's argument here? Or do you feel like there's some straw manning going on here? There's some hasty conclusions that are being drawn here. It seems like there's some misunderstandings that are going on here. And while I applaud Dr. Tripp for reading the book and actually taking the time to review it, because there are some people, Richard Carrier, who have said, hey, I read the book and I reviewed the book, and you could tell by reading the book, he actually didn't, if he did read it, he skimmed it. So I appreciate the engagement. And I think that it had some interesting moments, but ultimately it just kind of fell short of expectations. And so if you guys have questions, I should have alerted you. I could take maybe a couple of questions, but I'm just going to call this a short one. But yeah, if you have any questions, let me know. I'm happy to do it. Dark Wolf is in the comments. How many tacos have you eaten this week? Probably 5, 2 today, 3 yesterday, and that is it. And so the wife is all about the street tacos. Praise the Lord. He that finds a wife finds a good thing. And so, yeah, good question, Dark Wolf. I appreciate you as always, man, for always being there. Just checking real quick for any other questions. And then we'll just let you guys go. 1 second here. I think that's it. I know I didn't really give you guys warning, so I apologize. I apologize again for the mic issues at the beginning. So, all right, well, stay tuned because we have a lot more. Again, I'm not doing back and forth with YouTubers. It's just, again, Dr. Tripp is a biblical scholar, and I think, again, he's a really sharp guy. And so, hopefully he'll take this feedback in the spirit that it's meant. This isn't like, let's let's attack. You know, it's not about that, right? I know some people that are like, well, you're just a McGroupie and you're just being defensive, and Dr. Tripp's a scholar and you're just a YouTuber. You know, what do you really have to say? You're obviously biased about this stuff. But it's like, no, when I've been understanding this argument and studying this argument for a while, and I just see it like blatantly kind of like missing the mark in a critique and multiple fronts. And these were just one example. Then, you know, just hear the substance of what I'm saying. And then we could all tweak our arguments. We could all make our arguments better. Even if we end up disagreeing at the end of the day, I like the fact that we like the text, that we're interested in the text, that we're interested in the origins of these texts and what they actually go back to and how these all came about. And I think it's fascinating. And I think it's interesting. And I think we can enjoy this stuff together, even if we come, you know, down on completely different sides at the end of the day. And so this isn't meant at all to come from like a place of defensiveness or anything else like that. I just, you know, if you're gonna critique the argument, like let's do it well, you know. And I could get better, of course, always. All right. I'm not saying that I'm the most perfect apologist at all. I'm just a dude who's interested in this stuff, and so and I'd like to get better. And so, anyways, I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope again that this was helpful. And you guys have a great rest of your night.